UK and elsewhere to show that young children can ask historically valid questions, are very curious about the past and really want to find out. So we need to start with very young children. If you've got very young children at home, 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, they're always asking questions. And I think one of the parts of a discipline of history is actually to encourage asking questions. So in primary schools, we want children to ask questions, to try and find answers from the remains of the past, whether it's artifacts, buildings, asking their parents. We want them to know that history is a representation of the past, that the people, there's lots of different ways of seeing how the past is told and how it's represented. We want them also to be aware of chronology, about how things changed over time. And because that's a really abstract idea for very young children to grasp, we need to give them the vocabulary to be able to talk about the passage of time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. So the key idea is historical knowledge, but also the skills conceptual development, which we're wanting to encourage with children as well. And they're both within the curriculum. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Well, when we're talking with very young children, we start to talk about how their history, their personal histories, how they have changed. And here we've got 2 5-year-olds thinking a bit about how they've changed. The playpen, this is a playpen. I sometimes think it looks more like a prison, but it's actually to keep the child safe. Another child says that I went to the zoo and I saw a giraffe, but he's in a pushchair. And now, of course, this child's at school and he can walk. So he's beginning to talk about the differences, what has happened in his own life, what changes has occurred. The initial ideas that there has been a past, that we're not always living in the present. And of course we can construct our own timelines. I've taken this from this book. This book? No, wrong one. This book. Which was a picture book I created when the first national curriculum came in, and we wanted young children to think about the different stages in their life. And here, this is towards the end. It's from here, and this child has to put the pictures in order. But of course, as they're doing that, children are learning very important historical terms, before and after, now, then, old, new. These are all important words for children, young children to know about, so that they can explain what they know about the past later on. So in these very early years, we're giving them a vocabulary to be able to talk about the past. And of course, they look at their own lives, but they can also share with their families their families' histories. So we can invite parents and grandparents to come into school to talk about their histories, or what life was like when they were young. This is a picture book where a grandma is showing pictures, family pictures, photographs of the family, and she shares it with her little boy, and he realises the history of his own family, and also that there were people, his family was there before he was, which is quite a difficult idea for young children sometimes to realise that their parents had a life before the young child arrived. So that's that example there. So, but then I wanted to introduce children to history beyond their family, to ways of life in the past. So one thing that I did about 10 years ago was to create this book, A Day in the Life of a Victorian Child living at the end of the 19th century. Because I wanted children to know how ways of life have changed, although there are also lots of similarities. And so I did this picture book. There's a copy here, but I put it on the OHP so you can see it better. And first of all, because I'm interested in early years, whenever I'm thinking about history, I'm also thinking about other aspects of their development. And one thing when we're teaching early reading, we want children to know how books work, and that a reference book would have a contents page. So this contents page saying what's actually in the book is very important for these young children as they're approaching a book. It gets them to know how a book works. And if they can't read very well, we try to keep it as simple as possible. And then when I was thinking about the story, I needed to think what would children be interested in, and also what would young children be familiar for young children, because I want them to be able to draw comparisons between now and then, things which are the same, things which are different. So I chose things, daily occurrences in their lives, for them to be able to compare and contrast with their own. But also, I wanted them to know that we learn about the past from what is left behind as well. And artifacts, I think, are a very good way of helping children to realise that. So here, I have the slate with the pencil, and the children can have a look at this when I'm reading with them. But they can see the picture as well, and they can see how children use the slate and the pencil. Because very often they're given something to look at and they don't know how it's used. So they need to know how it's in its context and how people are using it. So that's what I hope to show there. Also, it's important to have the artifact because they can see how big it is as well. Going home, lots of differences now. Our currency changed in 1970, but we do have still a lot of old pennies, which I've got some here. You felt they're really a good size, this penny. You felt very wealthy if you had a penny. It's nice and heavy. You feel you've got quite a lot of money. You won't buy very much at all, if anything, now. And going to bed. And then again, as I say, as an early years teacher, I want them to know how books work again. So I put an index so they know they're being trained right from the very early years how to use an index to find things out. And on this side, the blurb. How do we know, what is this book about? What am I going to find out if I open these pages? So this side, we thought very carefully about the blurb, which we were going to put on the back. Again, to help children learn and realise about reference books. So that's an example where, in simple ways, we can get children to know about the past from its artefacts, and also to realise that there's lots of stories we can tell about it. But I also like children to become engaged in their own stories of the past. And I do this a lot by using artefacts. And this is Marjorie's box. I take in a little suitcase with different artefacts in, objects for children to have a look at. And some of the things from that box are here. the spectacles, the gloves, and they love to feel these gloves and to try them on. A little souvenir from a holiday. Is this precious or not? We don't know. It didn't cost very much, but now that it's getting old, it's assuming some value as well. Different sorts of things to put in a box, just old things to arouse children's curiosity. And you can see some of the things which they say as they work with these things. Now this is all in Turkish, so you can read it, but I'm going to have to presume that that we're saying the same thing here. But what I'm interested in looking at here is getting the children to talk, to raise questions, and also to make suggestions, to draw some conclusions as well. So we're trying to develop their own ideas. I've got the children working in groups, in small groups, so it's not just one child saying something. Each child bounces ideas off each other. The teacher is standing back at the moment, not intervening, just trying to find out what the children know. And they will use this then later on to think, how can I develop what they know a little bit further by asking them questions or by giving them a specific task to do. But at this stage where this conversation is going on, I just want to know what they're making of these different artifacts and things. And you see, they can raise various historical questions. They are asking lots of questions, and they're also drawing on their existing knowledge to support some of their ideas as well. Children come into school and they have a range of knowledge, and we need to capitalise on that as well. Sometimes we forget that they've got a life outside school and they've been told things by their parents, they've been on trips, they've been on journeys elsewhere. Well, let's give them an opportunity to talk a little bit about that as well. So this activity enables them to do that. And we've got a little bit more here as well. The little bit I like is when the child says, look at these gloves. Do you think she would mind if I tried them on? And I thought that showed quite sophisticated understanding, actually, that somebody actually had owned the gloves. The gloves had been precious to somebody, and would they mind if they tried them on? I felt that this young child has actually shown quite a lot of empathy with the past, to think about, is it okay to try them on? Would the person allow me to do it? So I hope this is just a little snapshot, but I hope it's given you some ideas about how I'm interested in young children's learning in history and the sorts of comments which they make. And of course, from these comments, we can develop more of our history teaching from up there onwards. Now, I've talked about some of the processes of learning history in those examples, but the Key Stage 1 children also have specific historical knowledge to learn as well. If you remember, I said the curriculum was part processes and conceptual development, also historical knowledge. And at the moment, they have to learn about some key events. And these events at the moment are based on Remembrance Day, November the 11th, for the Remembrance Day, the First and the Second World War, the Olympic Games, and the Great Fire of London. It's a very, I think a lot of people feel that we ought to be developing a greater awareness of different events as well. It's rather a limited selection of events. And similarly, the selection of significant people who they have to learn about although teachers have a choice, they tend to choose these ones. Guy Fawkes, I don't know, Guy Fawkes actually was one of the earliest terrorists. In 1605, he attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament. His plot was foiled, but we still, and I don't know why, we still celebrate his day. I mean, I think we should remember his day, but I'm not sure whether it should be a celebration. And also Brunel, who was a great engineer and who is linked very closely with us in Bristol, because his ship, the SS Great Britain, which he built, and the suspension bridge in Bristol was built by him. And one character you might have heard about, because I understand you have the Florence Nightingale Museum in Istanbul, though when my colleague Dean and I were there on Monday, we didn't manage to get to visit it, but maybe that will be for another visit. Florence Nightingale is the woman that is talked about. But you can see it's really quite limited, and the new curriculum is offering lots more opportunities to learn about different sorts of people, artists, scientists, musicians, people who've achieved in lots of different ways. And we're hoping that this is actually going to help children to learn about a wider wider range of people. And it might be somebody like Ibn Battuta, who I've actually chosen because I think he travelled through Turkey, definitely through Istanbul, up to the Black Sea, on his travels round through Afghanistan and down into India. And he's such a great traveller that we actually seem to have forgotten about him in the West, and I'm hoping that more children will learn about his travels. And to help teachers think about, well, how do we teach about such people, I encourage them to devise questions, just as children devise questions which they want to ask, questions which we can then explore in the classroom as well. So here we've got questions which we can try and find answers to, and it provides a way, rather than telling children, asking them to think about what do we know. So who was Ibn Battuta and where did he live? What was the most important events in his life? So they have to find a little bit out about his journeys. But then something about what society was like when he lived. Because if we know what society was like then, we can begin to realise what a tremendous journey he undertook. People didn't travel very much in that time. So for him to have travelled all these distances was actually quite important. We can find out what sources of information we can use to find out about him and why we should remember him. So those are key questions which I encourage teachers and researchers to actually help frame the way that they teach about significant people. They're generic questions which could actually relate to anybody. Finally, before I leave Key Stage 1, I'd like to talk about the importance of play-based activities as well for young children. Because it is through their play that children rehearse their ideas, they practice what they know, and they come to develop new understanding. Watching young children play helps you understand what they're taking in, what's important to them, and how they're making sense of new information. So, although play areas have been a feature of classrooms in England, unfortunately at the moment we're not finding them as often as we did. This is because the government is more concerned with passing tests and testing children, even at a very young age. And so unfortunately, although we recognise, for early years educators recognise the importance of play, there is less play going on in English classrooms than there used to be. But where it does go on, there is a very rich learning. And in history, there are wonderful opportunities. I've had students who have created Victorian kitchens, 19th century kitchens in their classrooms. I've had students who've created a museum in their classroom, and this is what I want to show you here. She asked the children and their parents to bring in toys, and they created a toy museum in their classroom. So here was one of the exhibits, the toy, and they can begin to talk about why is it old, what does it look like, what makes it old, how's it different from toys we have today. The student created the museum, made around the classroom. The children then became the curators, so anybody who visited the museum had to be taken around the museum and the children explained the exhibits to them. They also had to learn how to label all their objects, which is this object here. The child writes the label to go with it. So you can see how history is also enhancing other skills, writing and reading skills. And then they made catalogue entries as well. So each museum was in an object was tabulated in a little category in a catalogue as well. So there was a lot of learning going on, but at the same time, these children were playing and having a good time as they developed their notions about what a museum was. And it's that sort of activity going on in early years classrooms that really can make history so rich and alive. And I think it's something also that we're needing to do more research on to convince others that this is a good way for very young children to learn history, when we've got examples of the work which children do and the sorts of things that they do in these play areas. I think we need some more case studies on that. I want now to move on, having left the very young children, to looking at Key Stage 2 history. So these are the 7 to the 11-year-olds. And this is the curriculum which will be coming in September 2014. And there's been two real big concerns with the politicians, the Conservative politicians particularly, about the history curriculum in primary schools. One was that there should be they should know a lot more British history. And secondly, that children needed to have a much more chronological understanding of history, so that they had a good framework about when things happened. And so we can see that the chronology comes in the first part. So the children learn up from the Stone Age to 1066. 1066 is a cut-off date in English history. It's when we have the battles of Hastings and the Norman invasion of England. And so young children learn from Stone Age to there of English history. They then have to learn a series of ancient histories, as you can see, ancient Sumner, Indus Valley, ancient China and ancient Egypt. They also learn a local history study unit, and they also learn something in the 9th century as well. That's so that they can draw some comparisons between the English history which they learn at the top. And there's also an opportunity to for teachers to do two studies themselves. This curriculum has caused an immense amount of controversy. This final curriculum, there was about 18 months debate until this was finally decided. Key Stage 1 teachers are very happy with their curriculum. Key Stage 2 teachers are very concerned about this curriculum, and I'll try and point out what some of their concerns are and some of their worries. But first of all, one aspect of the new curriculum, which was present in the old one, which we really like, is the emphasis on local history, local studies. And we feel this is really important because you can take the children out of the classroom, you can take them around the neighbourhood so they can see the remains of the past around there. We've got old photographs for children to work with. They can ask their families about what the neighbourhood was like in the past as well. So there's lots of opportunities for children to engage with the history of their locality. These two pictures here from Bristol represent modern Bristol, 2000, these fountains were put up, and what it used to look like in the past, in the Victorian time. And we could have a lot of discussion with children about things which they can see, things which are different, things which are the same, and help them to draw comparisons. Maps are another way as well. Where can you find these places on the maps? This map of Bristol is particularly interesting because the second floating harbour here has been completely tarmacked over. So this bit here no longer exists and has been disappeared for over 100 years. And children find that quite fascinating to see how, through using maps, how a place has changed. So again, lots of opportunities for children to develop history inquiry skills through using their local neighbourhood. But chronology still remains a problem, and the government's answer has been to ensure that you start at the beginning and you just keep on learning history chronologically, because there's I think a misconception that you learn about chronology by learning things in correct order. You don't learn chronology in that way particularly. You learn chronology much more by seeing how different events connect with each other and realising the connections. So drawing comparisons between one period and another is really important, but you don't necessarily have to learn it all in a chronological order, because in the end, if you do that, you just try to memorise dates all the time and it doesn't have any deeper meaning to you. That is my view. The views on how to teach chronology are still being developed, and I've been working with a colleague in the Netherlands who has been researching how to teach chronology and is now developing an instrument to actually support children in learning chronology. So we're looking forward to hearing the next part of her work. And you see that I've mentioned her in the paper. In fact, a lot of the references are in the paper rather than me giving them to you now as I'm talking to you. Another real concern we have at Key Stage 2 and at Key Stage 3 and beyond is that Britain is a multicultural nation and we want children to find their stories within the history of Britain. For children who are learning from the Stone Age to 1066, it's very difficult for us to incorporate histories of different communities within the history teaching that they learn. So we've got a lot of people who come from Poland. The second picture shows Sikhs fighting in the Second World War. The Windrush, which was the ship which brought many people from the Afro-Caribbeans to work in England. And we've got Asians coming from Uganda in the 1970s. I just chose some pictures of the variety of people that we have living in the UK, and we have to think, how can we help them to find their place in British history? And if we're always teaching very early periods, it's a lot harder for them to see how their stories fit in. So it's an area of concern for us at Key Stage 2. Another area I have as an area of concern is the focus on archaeology as well, learning all early history. I think it's great to learn some archaeology, very important. But children have 4 years in primary school to learn, and I think they need a variety of histories. If they're always learning archaeology, either it's going to really appeal to them and they're really wanting to learn history in the secondary school, or it could actually mean that they've lost interest in history because they haven't had an opportunity to see a little bit more and learn a little bit more about the more recent past, which perhaps is more real to them than doing a lot of archaeology. So I'm quite concerned. I think it's good to do some, but I think we've now got an undue emphasis on looking at archaeology. Right. I need to check what this one says. And this one is a particular difficulty as well, is the way that we teach and train primary school teachers. Most primary school teachers are not history specialists. They've now been given this enormous history curriculum to teach, and we're concerned that they won't have the historical knowledge to be able to teach the curriculum. So the government at the moment is not putting very many resources into teaching, into retraining. So this is a big worry that although we've got this curriculum, how will it be taught? Inspections by Her Majesty's inspectors have actually shown again that teachers lack confidence very often in teaching history. So we have a big job to do there in our work. Throughout this presentation, I've emphasised the importance of young children talking about the past. And I'd like just to talk to you for the last few minutes about why I think this is so important. In their recent publication, Into Thinking, The Importance of Talk, Littleton and Mercer explain how interthinking is an evolutionary development which occurs as people recognise the value of arriving at joint decision making. And they suggest that talk can be analysed on 3 levels. In the first place, linguistically, there are different forms of talk: disputational, exploratory, and cumulative. And they all involve learners in different roles and interactions. Psychologically, talk may contribute to shared thinking and action as you develop ideas together. And of course, culturally, the context where talk occurs is also important. And we need to think about what opportunities there are for dialogue in classrooms. So I think these 3 aspects of talk actually provide a useful framework for analysing history activities in children's learning. They raise questions such as, what opportunities are there for different varieties of talk: disputational, cumulative, exploratory. In Marjorie's box, we had a lot of exploratory talk going on as children were sorting out their ideas. I might then have intervened and asked them to make some decision about perhaps what was the most important article in the box. And if I'd done that, there was definitely been some disputational talk, because they would have had different ideas and they would have had to argue their point of view. I might then have asked them to actually have to reach a decision, a conclusion. And so they would have had to have used cumulative talk to bring it together. And that's just one example about how you could use different forms of talk. I need to think about how I organise groups so that children can share ideas and draw conclusions from their historical investigations. And think about the classroom atmosphere as well. Is the classroom supportive for children to express their ideas and to feel that their ideas are valued? And that means listening to children, but also acting on what they say as well, not just saying that's very interesting, but then devising your teaching, building on what they have said. I think case studies which explore children's talking history activities may thus be fruitful in providing data concerning children's historical knowledge and understanding. In particular, research which illuminates how children make sense and interpret different sources of historical information as evidence of ways of life in the past would be useful for practitioners planning their work with young children, and also researchers who are interested in researching in what ways children develop their understanding of the past. Young children are confronted with information about the past all the time through media, films, storybooks, conversations with family, friends, and so on. And as educators, we're responsible for ensuring that children critically engage with these different representations and to analyse why some of these representations might be more valid than others. Recording ways in which children may communicate their understanding of ways in which history is represented through their talk, through writing, through their role play and so on, will provide valuable insights into how they learn history and provide a focus for future research. So in this lecture, I hope that I provided you with a brief overview of some of the developments within the history curriculum in primary schools in England and some avenues for further research. And I hope that during the conference we could perhaps have some time to develop some of these ideas more fully and think about research agendas which may be developed for children in the early years and primary schools. Thank you.